a review on an eyeshadow palette, and it is the one from Barry M, and it's called the Smokin Hot Shadow and Blush Palette. I've already reviewed the Barry M Natural Glow Shadow and Blush Palette, so if you're interested in seeing a review on that, then I will link it in the description bar below. You can purchase this from Barry M, Boots and Superdrug. I got mine for £6.49. Barry M has quite a few of these palettes now. Like I say, they have the Natural Glow Shadow and Blush Palette. They also have, I think it's called like the Natural Glow too. They have another Natural Glow palette. They've got a few colourful palettes, and then they've got this one here, which is the Smokin Hot Shadow and Blush Palette, which is a very dark, smoky eyeshadow palette. So firstly here, this is what the packaging looks like. So it's just that black matte cardboard packaging, and then the title of the palette and the logo is all in hot pink, which is pretty nice. Black and hot pink is always a good choice. As always, I'll read the blurb on the back. So it says, create a smoking hot look with these 6 smouldering eyeshadows and a hot peach blush. And it includes 2 double-ended applicators as well. These ones here, which I've already taken out of the palette, because if you've watched my videos, you already know how I feel about those. So just as with the natural shadow and blush palette, it's quite a nice little size, great for travelling, and it has a magnetic closure as well. Once you open the palette up, just as with the other palette, you've got your mirror as well. Not the most useful mirror in the world because it doesn't stand up on its own. Once you open the palette up, you are greeted by your 6 eyeshadows and your blush right at the end here. And this little bottom strip here is where your 2 sponge tip applicators will be. So as usual with these palettes, they are 6 no-name shadows. So I'm just going to swatch each of them and talk you through the colours. So the first shadow we have here is this white highlight shade. And this is the shade that I've used on my brow bone and in my inner corner as well. And this is actually really nicely pigmented. I don't want to spoil too much if you haven't seen my review on the Natural Shadow and Blush palette, but there were quite a few things that I wasn't too keen on about that palette, and pigmentation was a real problem for me with that palette. This palette does perform a little bit better, and not even just because they're darker shadows, but I find that the lighter shadows, the highlight shade, performs much better than the one in the Natural Shadow and Blush palette as well. So that there is the highlight shade, which is really nice. It is extremely pigmented, and it definitely is much more impressive than the one from the Natural Glow palette. It does have a slight shimmer running through it, nothing too crazy, nothing really, no chunky glitters or anything like that, just a really nice soft shimmer. So that's a really pretty highlighting shade. I can see myself grabbing for that quite a lot. The next shade we have here is this very soft peachy shade. Now this shadow is pretty similar to my skin tone, especially once I place it on the eye. I use this as a transition shade for something for that darker shadow to blend into, and it worked really well on me. But I feel like if you have a medium to deep skin tone, you might struggle with using this as a transition colour, which is in a way why I wish that this was actually more of a brown shadow than this peach shadow that you see here. Something like the Naked eyeshadow from the Naked palettes, that would be a brilliant transitioning shade. But if you are very fair skinned like me, this might work out okay for you. So that's the peachy shade there. Now this shade is what I placed on the inner part of my lid, and although it went on okay, it's probably the biggest letdown in the palette. It's my least favourite shadow. It doesn't have the best pigmentation, as you might see there. It applies quite patchy, and I really find you have to build up the colour to get any kind of colour payoff with it. So that's not necessarily my favourite one in the palette. And then you've got this darker gunmetal bluish grey here. And that's what I've applied on the outer corners of my eyes. Now even though it does look like a gunmetal grey here, once swatched I feel like it goes on more like a charcoal black shade. But this does have very fine glitter particles running through it. But it has great pigmentation, it applies to the eyelids really nicely. A little bit of fallout, so make sure you tap off your brush. But that is one of my favourite shadows in the palette. I think it is a really nice shadow. So we have 2 black shadows in it, one with a matte finish and then one with a shimmery glittery finish. So I'll just swatch the one with the glitter finish, and that's what I'm wearing on my lower lash line. And this is quite impressive because the glitter particles do actually show up on the eyelid, which is nice. It's not one of those eyeshadows that have really nice glitter particles inside and then once you apply it to the eye they just drop off and it looks matte. So that's pretty nice, and again really nice pigmentation. And then we have this matte black at the end here. This is kind of what I took up slightly into the crease and on the outer corners as well. This is a really nice matte black shadow. I find that it is not the best when swatched, but but it applies to the eyes beautifully, and it actually is way more pigmented than the swatch actually gives it credit for. But that's the matte black shade there. Overall, I'm pretty impressed with this eyeshadow palette. I didn't have many great things to say about the last Barry M palette that I reviewed, but this one's definitely worth trying out in my opinion. It does have some really nice eyeshadows in it, and especially if you really love that smoky look. It's £6.49 for 6 eyeshadows and a blush that are pretty pigmented and they do blend really nicely. I think that's a bargain. So this is something I definitely would recommend that you go out and try out and swatch it in the shops and see what you think. Like I say, it doesn't come without its problems. This kind of lighter grey shade is a bit of a dud in the palette. This peach shade is pretty nice for fair skinned girls, but I'm not necessarily sure how it would work on anybody who's deeper in skin tone, and I almost feel like I wish they replaced it with like a brown transitioning colour. I think that would just suit a lot more skin tones better. In terms of formulation, they all feel very, very smooth and creamy. The peach shade, the grey shade, and then the 2 shimmery shades do have a lot of kick up, so definitely make sure to tap the brush off with those. This black sparkly shade is definitely the driest shadow in the palette. It's definitely more gritty, but everything else in here is actually pretty smooth, and in terms of pigmentation they are pretty impressive, as you can see here. So the fact that they got 5 out of 6 of this right is pretty awesome. Even though I wish they did swap out the peach shade, there's not really anything wrong with it. I just don't think it's going to show up on most skin tones. And then moving on to the blush, basically this is their hot peach blush, so I'm just going to swatch that for you, and I am wearing this on my cheeks today. Now this is very, very pigmented, this blush. You need to be really light-handed with it. But it's a really beautiful colour. It's like a proper hot coral kind of colour. There it is there. And I think that would look beautiful on deeper skin tones. You can get away with it if you're fair like me, but you have to really, really, really be careful when applying this. Make sure that you just dip your brush in slightly, tap off any excess, and very lightly apply this to your cheeks, because it doesn't take much to end up with that kind of colour on your cheeks. Once applied, I do think it does look very nice, and it's a nice colour blush for summer. So my overall thoughts for this palette is I definitely do recommend it. The fact that it has 6 eyeshadows and a blush, so you're getting 7 products for £6.49. In terms of something like travelling with this, you might want to grab another little palette that has some good transitioning shades in it, because that's what this particular shadow palette is lacking. It's not a huge deal in my opinion. I feel like transitioning shades are quite easy to come by. I think it is a great size palette for travel. I think it's great to pop in your bag. Say if you go into work and you're going out that night and you don't have time to go home and maybe do your makeup, you can take this with you and apply your makeup on the go. And you know, you've got all your eyeshadows and your blush as well. So you could easily transform your daytime look into a nice smoky nighttime look. So I really like that about it as well. I really like how nice and compact it is. This Barry M palette is definitely a hit for me, much more so than the Natural Glow shadow and blush palette. If you watch my Natural Glow review, you'll notice that I do have a few problems with some of the products and the pigmentation in this palette, whereas I don't really run into the same problems with this palette, except for that one light grey shade. But like I say, I can live with that. But that is my review on the Barry M Smoking Hot Shadow and Blush Palette. Anyway guys, I hope this review has been useful and helped you in some way, and I shall see you in my next video. Bye!